There are things going on in Antarctica that we don't fully understand. It's a mysterious place. It's got a history of great mystery. And just a reminder, 1537 Perry Reese map showed it without ice. The best thing we could say is that it would be a different dimension. It was an interdimensional being communicating from another dimension. The claim was that this schematic was to create a flying machine that would allow some of the Nazis to escape some of the coming dark days, and that they could somehow translate or transfer themselves from this realm into the Aldebaran realm. When we study the Nazis, you can't separate the Nazis from the occult. The occult meaning tapping into higher entities, tapping into ascended masters, locating ancient technology, reviving all of these things, and also the interest in the inner earth and the races that might live inside the earth, dating back to being descendants of the Nephilim. Well, the Catholic Church also has set up churches on top of many of these, and I mean the Vatican, by the way, not necessarily the Catholic Church on the corner in your neighborhood, but the Vatican has been setting up churches, taking land, sacred land, entrances into these hollow earth catacomb cities, building churches, cathedrals on top of them. Various places around the world have these subterranean cities, these catacomb cities, and it's believed that somehow they're connected throughout the entirety of the earth. If you have the right knowledge, if you've got the training, essentially you could get from one part of the earth to the absolute opposite, going through tunnel systems in some of these cities. You could say it's a conspiracy theory, but then Time Magazine actually covered it. I'm Justin Fall, and you're watching End Times Productions. This is actually dealing with the idea that there are subterranean realms beneath our feet. And it carries a lot of supernatural elements to it as well. The Bible talks about a subterranean realm or realms. Many cultures of the world have had these beliefs of things coming up from inside the earth, entities coming up, beings coming up, gods of various religions. A lot of the myths and the different cultures of the world talk about this. I've always found that very interesting, namely because in the book of Job, you have this kind of an interesting scene in heaven where Satan comes up, presents himself before God, and not just before God, but also before the sons of God, which we know to be the angels. And God asks him, whence comest thou? Where have you come from? Now, of course, God already knows where he's come from, but he's asking him, he's putting him on a somewhat of a trial here to, tell me where you've come from and what have you been doing, essentially. And Satan says this very strange language about going to and fro in the earth and walking up and down in it. Now, when you start to consider the language used there, which many of the newer Bible translations has tried to modernize and I'll dare say rationalize. When we come to a point in trying to rationalize ancient scripture, we change the meaning of it oftentimes. You've probably heard of the phrase lost in translation. We got to be careful to not try to rationalize scripture when it's been given in a certain format. And I love how the King James, I think the New Jerusalem Bible and some of the other older Bibles, they've maintained in the earth, walking up and down in it. So when you consider Satan walking back and forth, up and down, it's not just a matter of globetrotting, if you will. It's not just a matter of walking around on the surface of something. You're talking about back and forth, up and down in it. That's different. There seems to be some sort of a dimensional understanding there that the modern world has, at one point, after the invention of rationalism, has tried to look at that and rationalize that text. But there's so much in the Bible about subterranean catacomb realms, what some cultures will call catacomb cities, things taking place inside the earth. I mean, we have the bottomless pit, which there is a key to the bottomless pit, where there's going to be an angel who's going to come down and open the bottomless pit at one point, and demonic entities, creatures, Some would even call insectoid type creatures are going to come up out of this portal, if you will, inside the earth. They're going to come up to the face of the earth and bring torment. There's going to be some very strange things happening. Smoke is going to come up out of the bottomless pit with creatures and entities. I want to make another point biblically before we move on to some of the content. When we put together this film, the Hollow Earth Chronicles, and this is the first installment. Matter of fact, it's interesting, when we set out to make this film, the rough cut had just barely been completed. And the late Tom Horn saw the rough cut, was blown away by it, and said, "Would you please come work over here? Would you mind moving here to do a joint project, co-writing a film?" Which we ended up doing the writing of the film, Belly of the Beast. But we didn't even have a chance to do a hard release of Hollow Earth Chronicles. It never actually got an official hard release because Tom Horn wanted us to come on out and work on another project with some of his resources, which was a great opportunity. I'm really glad we did, but I'm also very thankful to be now doing a hard release of the Hollow Earth Chronicles some years later, but now released in the 4K master. You're talking about looking at the footage, B-roll imagery in stunning 4K. I mean, ultra high definition, like it's never before been seen. I mean, even if you're looking at it on a 1080p screen, to have 4K footage, the footage looks amazing. So I'm really excited that we're going to be releasing this. But getting into some of the biblical ideas, I just want to kind of highlight a few of these before we move on. In the Old Testament, you have Sheol in the Hebrew. The Old Testament was predominantly Hebrew. The New Testament was Greek. There's kind of a weird cultic conspiracy theory going around nowadays that the ultimate New Testament is in Hebrew. That's completely fabrication. It's very Hebrew roots oriented. There's nothing to validate that. What we know is that the acceptable biblical manuscripts, all the New Testament manuscripts, you're dealing with the Greek language. In the times of Jesus, the apostles, Greek was a normal language in their culture. Matter of fact, when they were quoting the Old Testament, they were quoting a Greek translation of the Old Testament called the Septuagint. And in the Septuagint, we find some very interesting references. That's where we get the reference to Nimrod going through some type of a process and changing himself into a Gabor, or a what some people would call a Nephilim. Not really sure all the logistics there, how something like that could happen. It's obviously some type of an occult ritual, a satanic ritual that would have taken place that could have justified such a transition. But there's also references in the Septuagint about giants in the earth, coming up out of the earth. In one place, talking about giants in the earth in battle garb. And we break some of this down in the Hollow Earth film. This is not too far from some of the myths and the legends of the Native American, the indigenous people, and the tribes. They have some very interesting things to say about that. We'll get into some of that here in just a little bit. But I want to make this point. In the Old Testament, in the Hebrew, you have Sheol. Now, you might hear people in conversation kind of referring to Sheol, Hades. They'll even in the same conversation, in the same sentence, they'll refer to it as Sheol, Hades. We're talking about the same place. In the New Testament, it's Greek, which you're going to have Hades. And in the Old Testament, it was Hebrew, and it was Sheol. You're going to find that word showing up all throughout the manuscripts of the Bible. But in the English, what you're going to see is hell. Generally speaking, hell. It's kind of fascinating. You'll have the word love show up in the Bible, but it could be one of several words in the Greek, and they actually mean different things. Same thing with the word hell. So I just want to kind of hash through this real quick. The Old Testament, again, Sheol. New Testament, Hades. But fascinating, you have a reference by Peter in 2 Peter to this other place. Now, your English Bible is going to say hell, but in the Greek, it's Tartarus. Tartarus was a term very familiar with the Greeks and the Greek culture, Greek mythology. It was a place as far below Hades. It's not Hades. Tartarus was as far below Hades as the earth is below heaven. So just to give you an idea, what we would call hell is deep within the earth. Tartarus, deeper. We're talking about a place so far down, one of the darkest places In the Greek culture, they believed this is where the most vilest, the most disgusting, evil, wicked monsters and gods are being kept. Now, Peter talks about Tartarus, and this is where he says he's making a reference back to the antediluvian world. This is going back to a time when fallen angels took wives of men. They committed sexual sins against humanity. It was rebellion against God. It was rebellion against God's order. And they essentially, they created the Nephilim. They created these hybrid offspring. And Peter says that those particular angels who did not keep their first estate, the ones that committed the sexual sin, essentially, they're being bound in this prison. So there's an actual prison inside the earth. So regardless of what shape someone thinks the earth is, or what form of cosmology they want to hold to, that stuff means nothing in this conversation. We're talking about biblical precedent here. There is a place in the earth where the most vilest and wicked demonic entities are being kept essentially right now in chains. It's a prison, it says in the scriptures. And that's Tartarus. And that is as far below Hades, hell, as far below hell as the earth is below heaven, according to the Greek belief. And the Apostle Peter knew all about this. And under the inspiration of the Holy Ghost, he penned his epistles. And in 2 Peter, you find out that's where these angels are being kept. So right off the bat, there is major biblical precedent to things inside the earth, things under the earth, and under the earth could potentially even mean things that are in that very low of low, some of the deeper regions. We also know that Christ himself, after his crucifixion, went down and preached to the spirits in prison. Now, I want to say this. He was not preaching a message of repentance. Okay, the gospel message, Jesus went around preaching, repent. That was a major part of what he preached. That was not what he preached here, because these were spirits in prison. They were not going to get a chance to repent. He went down there declaring victory, that he was literally about to come up from the grave. He was going to be seen by men all over the world. And by the way, when Jesus resurrected, he also brought with him other people who had already died. This is documented. Very few people talk about this. There was also a resurrection with Christ where people were resurrected. They came up, and according to some of the writings of the early church fathers, they lived, they were seen, and then they naturally died again because it was before the time of the official resurrection. So it was just more signs and wonders, miracles attesting to the fact that Christ was and is who he said he was, who he is. Christ is God in the flesh. When he came in his first advent, he was fully God, fully man. In theology, that's called the hypostatic union. We can't really wrap our head around it, but he was not a kenosis Christ. That's heresy. The early church deemed that heresy. This is a very popular teaching in the charismatic movement called the kenosis Christ. It's a heresy. It's taught at Bethel. The Bethel, the New Age church out in California, they teach kenosis Christ. Bill Johnson wrote about it in his book, When Heaven Invades Earth. This is a very popular teaching that Christ literally came and was completely undivine. He laid his divinity down while he came to earth. That is a lie from the pits of hell. He was fully God, fully man. And the truth is, when he went down and preached to those spirits in prison, he was declaring victory. He was essentially spitting in their faces. And then he came up, he rose from the dead, he brought others with him. And again, according to some of the writings of the early church fathers, Jewish historians, they did die again, natural deaths. But it attested to who he was, the God-man. 100% God, 100% man. He went down to the depths. It's kind of interesting because you have the story of Gilgamesh, which is like the oldest, allegedly the oldest story manuscript, which is a poem. Essentially, it's a story, but it's in poetry form. Gilgamesh was kind of a Nephilim type creature. And Gilgamesh goes down into the earth. He goes through these different trials, and it's a journey essentially. And he encounters monsters and weird things inside the earth, but Jesus went down there and declared victory with the power with what the New Testament, the word for power, the dunamis power, so the Greek word we get the word dynamite from. That's the power of God, the dynamite power, explosive power, unbridled power. We also call that the resurrection power, the power that rose Christ from the dead, which is also apparent in the lives of believers. That's the same power that God has towards us who believe in Christ, the true followers of Christ. We also walk in that dynamite power, that dunamis power. Christ went down there. He did everything perfect in all power, laid his life down, paid for our sins to reconcile a broken and sinful creation because of Adam's sin. It's called original sin. We're all sinners because of that. Christ went down into the depths of the earth and declared victory to the most vilest creatures, entities, demonic entities, what the Greeks called monsters. And then he rose and he told about it. Praise God. So there is biblical precedent to these things. And I think it's important to kind of break down some of the biblical precedent first, because as a Christian, as somebody who studies scripture, who takes theology very seriously, anything that we're going to kind of view in our areas of research, I think it's important that we have a strong biblical precedent first so that we can view everything else through a biblical lens. So now that we've kind of established the biblical precedent that there are demonic things going on inside the earth, Satan himself said he's been walking back and forth, up and down in it. What type of demonic complex is there in the earth? So it was important to kind of get past the biblical precedent first. Now we can talk about some of the different cultures of the world, what they believe, and some of the fascinating stories there to help us better understand kind of a well-rounded view of what is actually going on inside what we call the hollow earth. When we go back to some of the indigenous cultures, and it's really fascinating. I'm part Cherokee, and I know everybody says they're part Cherokee in America, right? Pretty much everyone here has a little Cherokee. No, I'm part Cherokee, and I've always been fascinated by Native American culture. When I was a child, I got to go to some of the reservations in Texas, and it was a really good experience. But when we filmed the Hollow Earth Chronicles, we actually went on to a reservation of the Arawak, where we spoke with an Indian chief who we feature in the film, and we get into some of their legends and beliefs. I don't think it's a disservice to use the term mythologies or myths or legends, because a lot of these things, we can't validate all of the aspects of them, but they have been orally passed down. They're oral traditions. Now, some of the written traditions are completely contradictory to the oral traditions, which is fascinating. We'll get into that too, especially with the Anasazi, because the written tradition is absolutely reversed from the oral tradition, which means they wrote it down in order to give the mainstream story, while the inner workings of the tribal people kept the real story, because it's almost too fascinating for the mainstream man to understand or to accept. But the indigenous people, most of them have some sort of a creation story, a creation myth. And I call it a myth because it's not completely in line with scripture. We know that the Bible, the creation story in Genesis, that's the real story. All the other ones we would call legends and myths because they're kind of offshoots, kind of blurry versions of that. But the story of you've got Navajo, you've got these different legends where the great ones were supernatural beings that would come up from inside the earth, create humanity, endow humanity with abilities, education, teach them how to do things, and then they would go back down into the earth where they would reside, but occasionally coming back up to the surface to overlook the operations of mankind, essentially. And doing that, there would be some sort of overlording, if you will. They would come up, teach them, hold them accountable. That's what some of the natives would teach. That's where, they claim that their origin point was inside the earth. Actually, there's multiple tribes that claim that their tribal origin point is inside the earth. Kind of a fascinating little bit of knowledge there. The Apache story, the Apache creation myth, is very fascinating, and it's different from some of the other tribes because they say that an ancient bearded man came down from heaven in a silver flying disc, and he began to create everything which is good, everything that is good and useful and lovely. And then shortly thereafter, a portal opened where a reptilian god-man, some sort of a reptilian in the form of a human, but not a human, comes through the portal and begins to teach mankind sorcery, alchemy, witchcraft, magic, how to open up portals, which is just very interesting that they would have this story of a good creator coming down and creating that which is good, and then this reptilian coming through another portal, corrupting what the good creator made. Another fascinating part of this is that the Apache couldn't grow facial hair. As with many of the indigenous people, they don't have beards and facial hair, yet their creation myth talks about an ancient, God coming down with a beard. Not to go too far into that, I don't want to speculate too much there. It's just kind of an interesting little story. But when you get to the Anasazi, and I wanted to kind of mention the Apache creation myth first, because it's going to kind of go parallel with some of the things with the Anasazi. The Anasazi, they've got a very fascinating story that the mainstream says that there was something like a 20-year drought that had happened. And so they had to migrate. It was a slow migration, and they died in the migration. They say that's why there's all these bones of the Anasazi, that appear on this migration route. But when you talk to someone in the know, say a medicine man, historian of a tribe, and they tell you, what really happened according to their tribe, they're going to tell you that the Anasazi basically started to have this experience where a portal opened in the earth. Giants began to come up out of this portal in the earth, like from inside the earth, and they began to cannibalize. They began to eat the Anasazi, ripping them to shreds, like jerky, if you will. About that same time, a portal opened and a reptilian comes through and begins to teach the Anasazi how to go down inside the earth and to build these inner earth temples, like a sanctuary, like a church, like what we would call a church temple or a church sanctuary. This reptilian taught the Anasazi to go down into the earth and to build what they called kivas. And these were prayer rooms. These were rooms where they would do rituals. And the reptilian taught them the same type of magic, apparently, in the rituals that the reptilian also taught the Apache. So we see a parallel there. And so once the Anasazi started to do this, they began to open up portals. That was one of the rituals that was taught by the reptilian, according to their legends. And they would open up portals. All types of strange entities began to emerge on the face of the earth. And the giants began to get more fierce. And the Anasazi were ripped to shreds, just absolutely ripped to shreds. When you study the archaeological digs where they're pulling up the bones of the Anasazi, they're mauled. They're not just like whole bone structures. They're shredded bone pieces, almost like shrapnel. Like Tom Horn said in Hollow Earth Chronicles, it was like they were being ripped to shreds, eaten by the giants. But when they opened up those portals, according to the legends, other entities came forth. Maybe they were fallen angels that were shapeshifters. Fallen angels are really not much different from Satan himself, who seeks to steal, kill, and destroy. When you consider that fallen angels want to manifest chaos everywhere, they want to take God's divine order and bring chaos to disrupt everything that God created. So it's very likely that they would have shape-shifted into different forms to bring about these different visions of different entities, if you will, even though they're fallen angels, which kind of gets back into the idea of the Greeks talking about Tartarus being filled with monsters. Because we don't really know all the forms that fallen angels took. What we do know is that angels are able to shapeshift and take on different forms, because even when Abraham met with some of the angels, they took on the form of men. We're told in the book of Hebrews, basically to be generous to strangers, be hospitable to strangers, because you might be entertaining an angel unaware. But the Anasazi disappeared. And it's fascinating because they had these hollowed out areas in the caves, like hollowed out caves in the mountain, and they found bags of salt. They found tools, things that would have been, apparently in that time, salt was like gold. They had all these supplies to live. It would almost be like someone disappears nowadays. You're watching like a true crime show and this lady disappears and they say, oh, well, she just left her husband. But then they find her car and she's got milk, eggs, cheese, groceries in the back seat. Obviously, if she was trying to run away, she would not have bought groceries to leave in the back of the car. The Anasazi, just like that, would not have had all of these things in place. They wouldn't have left that behind if they were just going to migrate. So there's a lot of conspiracy involved in the story, the official story that they have repackaged to tell of the Anasazi. One of the most mysterious of the tribes. When you think about the biblical explanation of the giants, they were hybrids. They weren't completely angel and they weren't completely man. So they would have had qualities and characteristics that were supernatural beyond what a human would have. However, they were not living in a heavenly abode. They would not have had access to the different heavens like an angel might. So I believe that the giants definitely would have resided inside the earth. Now, I do think that there's some possibility of in these cavernous regions, and we're going to get into some of this in a minute, even deeper. But the idea of these cavernous cities, these catacomb cities inside the earth, I do believe that there are dimensional realities there, kind of like Tartarus. I don't believe that you or I could go on a journey and physically approach Tartarus. When Jesus did it, it was because he was God. He was able to go through the dimensions. There's certain things that we can't do, kind of like the Garden of Eden. Let me just explain this real fast. The Garden of Eden is still in existence today, but it's being guarded. The Bible says this. So we can't really go find it or approach it. There's no way that we could actually, walk up on the Garden of Eden and make our way into that paradise. It's being guarded. You got flaming swords. It's not just some place you can just go walk inside. Just like Tartarus, we can't approach Tartarus. We would not be able to go to hell, essentially. If we were to get to the doorway or the gate of hell, we couldn't get inside. There would be some type of a blocking there, something which I tend to think is some sort of either it's dimensional or possibly it's a spiritual binding or a spiritual barrier there. But I do believe the giants had something to do with creating these subterranean cities, because we're finding out now that much of the technology used when you get down to like the Chinkana, and the Chinkana is just one example of countless underground cities throughout the entirety of the earth. And a lot of times when you find these cities, you find that there are megalithic structures on top of where the entrance would be or near an entrance. The Chinkana is basically, and we really dive into this into the film even deeper, it is the underground cavernous tunnel systems, if you will, cities of tunnel systems in South America. You're talking about an entrance very potentially at the foot of the Andes Mountains. And I believe the Chinkana itself, the name means a place where one gets lost. Many people would go down there. You have Incan treasure there. But even with the Inca, the Incan people and the different indigenous people who did utilize these cavernous systems in these cities, they were not responsible for building them. They discovered them. So when you get down there and you look around, you find out that these cities were actually built, these tunnel cities, catacombs, they were built before the flood of Noah's day. And they were utilizing a technology that wasn't even invented in our world until the advent of the Industrial Revolution. So there would have been no technology. The Inca did not, they didn't do anything but utilize these tunnel systems. People go down there, they get lost. Many people that go into the Chinkana never come back. Unless they have specific knowledge on how to get there. And you're talking about, Peru, Chile. I mean, these tunnels, they go possibly even under the ocean to Antarctica. I know that's kind of wild. But when we get to the Nazis, we're going to talk about that because there is a connection with the Chinkana and also some of the Nazis migrating into Antarctica after World War II, before what we call World War 2.5 took place. That's a fascinating topic. But various places around the world have these subterranean cities, these catacomb cities, and it's believed that somehow they're connected throughout the entirety of the earth. If you have the right knowledge, if you've got the training, essentially you could get from one part of the earth to the absolute opposite going through tunnel systems in some of these cities. You've got underground cities all over the place with a lot of interesting legends and myths. Even here in America, you've got the Kentucky Mammoth Caves. You've got Changsha. You've got different places in Asia Minor. One of the things that's real fascinating is that when you get to India, not only do they believe in the subterranean realms, and in the Hindu belief, they also have references to what we would call Agartha, Agarthi. But in the Hindu tongue, they call it Aryavartha. Now, Aryavartha is very, very interesting because it translates into English as the land of the Aryans. The Aryans. Now, scratch your head on this for a minute. The Aryans, that was the name of the race that was considered the supreme race of beings that lived inside the earth. That was part of the theosophical root race theory. You had Madame Blavatsky, Rudolf Steiner. You had some of these others that really focused in on this Aryan race being the supreme race of supreme races. Because in the root race theory, you had these antediluvian races. The Aryan race kind of overtook everything else, became the supreme race, which later on the Nazis believed that they were a watered down descendant of the Aryan race. But the Hindus clearly teach that this subterranean realm is called Aryavartha, the land of the Aryans. Now, the Aryans are not human, by the way. Very much a reference likely back to first generation, second generation Nephilim, or even directly to the gods of old, which we would call the fallen angels that kept not their first estate. What was fascinating is that the Hindu belief, while also paying nod to Shambhala and some of these other titles for the inner earth, realm, the Indian belief has some different views on some things. And I just want to outline this real briefly. You have this group of serpent people that the Hindus talk about called the Naga. Kind of a scary, horrific thought. They're serpent people. What maybe we would call them reptilians. That's not the language used in the Hindu culture. They're just serpent people. But they have an affinity for water. A lot of times they have entrances underneath water that lead into their subterranean realms. And the two cities that are most closely linked to this is Bhagavati and Patala. And basically, they're as above, so below. So you've got actual real cities, Patala and Bhagavata, they're on the surface. I'm sorry, Patala and Bhagavati, they're on the surface, but they also believe that there are subterranean cities under the same name that are parallel. The whole as above, so below. You've got the surface level, and then you've got underneath the world that we know, and they believe that's where the reptilians live, what I would call a reptilian, but what they call the serpent people or the Naga. The Naga also show up in some of the different cultures of Buddhists, Thai. It's not just the Hindus. But the Naga people, there's a lot of very rich history. When you go to India, you'll see a lot of rock carvings. You'll see a lot of different displays of what these serpent people might look like. And they're all different. Like, you're not going to see, they don't all match up and line up. You're going to see some that look like cobras, like a cobra man with a hood, like the cobra hood on the back of the neck. And then you'll see others that look like almost like a reptilian mammal. It's very, very weird to see all these different reliefs and rock carvings and even idol statues created. The Hindu belief of the Naga, interestingly, seems to have some sort of a parallel with something that we see in America beneath the City of Angels. When we get to Los Angeles in 1934, and I highly recommend people check this out, it's very fascinating. There's an article written about there was a geophysical mining engineer doing some work at Fort Moore Hill, and he sunk a shaft and fell down into what is called a catacomb city. And it was an ancient city. They found a treasure map. They found relics and artifacts showing serpent people, what they called reptilians. And what really blew my mind was the LA Times did a full write-up on this, multiple page write-up. They showed the map of the catacomb cities supposedly leading to some treasure, an ancient treasure, and it said there were reptilian inhabitants of this city. And it connected back to some of the beliefs of the indigenous Native Americans. And immediately, this sparked gold fever, if you will. People from all over came to LA to embark on inner Earth treasure hunts back in the 30s. In the film Hollow Earth Chronicles, we not only talk about this, but we got full resolution film scans from the LA Times. And we show the map, we show the images that were published. It's mind-blowing. If you didn't see it, you would have a very hard time believing the reality of these claims. But it's interesting also that Los Angeles stands for City of the Angels. It's got a history of being built over catacomb cities of reptilian inhabitants. And this was mainstream news in the 30s. We don't see this stuff in newspapers anymore. You don't hear this type of thing in the news. But in the 30s, this was published by a very reputable, very mainstream news source. We show all the different pages, film scans of all the different pages and breakdowns. Fascinating stuff. But that connects back to the Naga people, the serpent people of the Hindu culture. Before I made this film, I had done a 3-part series on my old podcast on the Hollow Earth. And that's really the basis of what ended up turning into this passion project to make this film. In my research, I did talk about Mount Shasta, where there's entrances to the mountain. At the time, he was not my friend, who he later became my friend, but a guy named Kenny had reached out to me, who lives at the base of Mount Shasta, essentially. And he reached out to me to tell me that not only does he hike up there, but he's got connections with people that live on the mountain. And he said, to this very day, there are excessive amounts of mountain magic that take place on Mount Shasta. It is a sacred magic land. People, they've got family members who have passed these traditions down over the years. And what's even more fascinating is that I also had someone send me a picture. I think they originally thought it was Japanese in origin, but I don't know. But it was a rock carving of a reptilian head. It almost looked like a dinosaur hybrid with a human. And this was on Mount Shasta. Someone living up on Mount Shasta, this was on their property. So there's some pretty interesting things about Mount Shasta. I think also with Mount Shasta, there's some connections to what people call the little people. There's a lot of speculation about Mount Shasta. I can't really say. I've never been inside. But what's interesting is that there's a lot of belief that some of these subterranean realms are also carved out inside of mountains, that you would go into a mountain. It's almost a hollowed out mountain, and it goes down to a massive underworld city where there's inhabitants. There's people living there, operating there. And I believe it was the Urals in Russia. There's a certain mountain range there that allegedly is so hollowed out and large, that this underworld city is so large and the mountains are hollowed out, that airplanes fly inside. I can't really imagine that. We do show some different artistic renditions in the film of underground cities, massive underground cities, with what we would call skies, like essentially space where planes or flying craft could fly around. And that's another thing that you really find kind of across the line. A lot of the stories where people end up in these subterranean caverns where they encounter these creatures, these entities, there's always technology beyond what we have on the surface. A lot of times there's some sort of a flying disc or flying saucer being utilized, transporting around inside of these subterranean realms. Matter of fact, the idea of UFOs coming up out of water. There's countless stories in California, especially out around Malibu, UFOs coming up out of the water. And you say, well, where are they going? When they come back down and they land in the water, where they're going, where do they go? Well, there's Going back to the Naga, the reptilian serpent people in India, the entrances to their underworld cities are a lot of times near water or underwater. Like you would have to get down into the water. You've got these native stories of like the coming of age stories in order to become a warrior in the tribe, where they'll send the boy. He's not a man yet. They'll send the boy. He'll have to dive into the water, make his way into a cavernous system underneath the water to where there's oxygen, and then from there find another body of water inside the earth, and then go down there and retrieve some type of a relic, a religious relic pertinent to their tribe, pertinent to their people or their ancestry. And then he's got to get that relic and bring it back up through these different layers of catacomb, what we would call like a catacomb city, or a cavern beneath water with another cavern beneath more water. I mean, it's wild stuff, but they come back with these relics, and now they're a warrior, they're a man. They can enter into that caste system of the tribe. So it's really not outside of that realm to have a UFO coming up out of the water and then going back down into the water, and then people go diving looking for it, and there's nothing to find. There's no trace of it beneath the water. I believe that many of the deep underground military bases could likely go back to the antediluvian world. They're already there. They're already created. And I mean, just think about it. The Vatican goes around everywhere. The Catholic Church is well known for taking over sacred sites. They just show up, take it by force, political persuasion, like Mount Graham, places in South America, near the Chinkana. You've got all these stories of the Catholic Church doing that. Well, think about the American government. Not to shame anyone here, but the American government is well known for taking things, sacred land, taking things from the Native Americans, the indigenous people. And so these ancient cities underground, these tunnel systems, catacombs, whole cities, hollowed out areas, being antediluvian, the government could have easily taken over these things that were already created, maybe created some extra structural divisions, walls, basically building inside of structures that were already existing before the flood. Because the structures themselves are so well built, and there is architecture used that is very much connected with megalithic structures around the world. And our governments did not have that technology until the advent of the Industrial Revolution. And so it would make sense that they went down there, took what was already there, utilized these underground sanctuaries, underground cities, what have you, and built inside of them with our modern technology, setting up what we would call deep underground military bases. And likely also, like getting into the Phil Schneider content, that there would be some levels inside of these military bases where you can't use the name Jesus. I'm sure we've talked about that previously with our other film, Higher Entities. And so that's already down in a region that they might have already been inhabiting. But, really, some of these DUMBs, these deep underground military bases, not only could go back to before the flood, but some of the technology might still be there operating by some of these other entities, what we would call off-world entities, if there's truth to what Phil Schneider said. Absolutely. When the Nephilim died, their souls, not being fully man or being fully angel, became the demon spirits or the earth spirits, which would seek to inhabit bodies. It's possible that those are the spirits that animate the gray aliens. There have been a lot of reports from people who claim to have been in the know that the gray alien was a biological suit created specifically to give a body to demonic spirits. Spirits that go back to before the flood of Noah's day, who, by the way, did not survive the flood, but their spirit is eternal. And that pays even more respect to the teaching of Jesus that eternity is eternity is eternity. There is no annihilation. Why would God allow the perversion of the Nephilim, their souls, to continue existing eternally, but he was going to annihilate the souls of evil humans? No. Souls are eternal. Everyone watching this video has a soul. I have a soul. You have a soul. It's eternal. And the Nephilim, being part man, part angel, they're eternal as well. But when their physical bodies were killed in the flood, which God makes no mistakes, he killed them. He slaughtered the Nephilim. But the reality of the matter is God killed them. with the flood. There was a second incursion. That's the only thing that lines up with scripture, because they were before the flood and after, when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men and they bore offspring. They became the mighty men of renown, the men of old. So, yes, there were Nephilim after the flood, and there's very good evidence that there are still Nephilim bloodlines today, by the which the Nazis believe they were descended of one of these lineages. We'll get into that here shortly, probably. But the Nephilim probably had a hand in building these massive tunnel systems, these tunnelways, these underground cities with the fallen angels. Remember, the angels kept not their first estate. What does that mean? That means they didn't stay in the abode that God created for them. They rebelled. They wanted what man had. They were jealous. They came down here to earth. So they didn't keep their first estate. Where did they go? They came to earth. What better places to inhabit than the places that man can't inhabit? So they go to inner earth, beneath the oceans. And that's why one of the theories with the Chinkana and with some of the other subterranean systems is that there are tunnels beneath the ocean floor. That's how you would be able to connect one end of the world to the other via subterranean system. One of the reoccurring themes that shows up no matter where you look, whether it's History Channel, whether it's books, newspapers, interviews, they all agree that the Nazis believed in what's called the Aryan race, which they believed was the supreme race. And it's interesting because somehow that gets shifted to believing that it's the white race, which is not at all what, that's not what the Aryan race was. The Aryan race was part of a supernatural descendants of the gods, according to theosophy. This is getting into the root race theory. And you mentioned earlier on about Lemuria and Atlantis. So in the root race theory, those two names are mentioned as races as well, but the Aryan race kind of took over as the ultimate race in this mythology. Let me just make that clear. I don't believe that the Aryan race is better than anything. That's not at all what I'm saying. In their mythology, they say that the Aryan race was the supreme supernatural race, but it was not man. And so this idea of the Aryan Brotherhood and stuff in modern world, like neo-Nazis, just a bunch of hogwash. It has no origin point with the ancient view of these things. It's just man doing what man does, being stupid, trying to find answers to things outside of God's word. Hitler and the Nazis believed that there was a pure race inside the earth, by the way, called the Aryan race. Now, they believed that they were descendants, watered down descendants on the surface of the earth post-flood, but they also believed that there were still modern descendants, if you will, of the Aryan race, but that were not called Aryans because they were still descended from, meaning that they weren't pure, but they were living inside the earth still. I want to get to that in a minute. The Nazis specifically believed that it was their birthright to have access to the inner earth realm, which eventually would lead to a capital city called Shambhala. Now, Shambhala was not a world before the flood. Shambhala is a very mystical sounding abode, if you will, where there's a king residing over the city. Now, it is considered the land of the gods. So it could very well be that this is the place that the fallen angels had kind of built for themselves to reside when they kept not their first estate. Again, not the fallen angels that are in Tartarus because they're in prison, but the other ones. And Satan is not bound right now. I think it's important to go ahead and say that. Satan is the ruler of this world. The Bible calls him the prince of the power of the air. The Bible also calls him the God of this world. So, little g God. Satan is not bound. He is literally operating, doing his bidding. And also remember what he said in Job. He was going up and down, back and forth inside the earth. So the mystical religions of the world believe in the Shambhala being a capital city of the hollow earth complex. So imagine, if you will, all these different cities of tunnel systems that can get you from the point of east to the point of west inside the earth. Well, somewhere in the middle would be Shambhala because it would be the nucleus, the capital city of Agartha or Agarthi, depending on the language. And so Shambhala is this place of the gods. It's the land of the gods. It's a capital city of the hollow earth, according to these these ancient beliefs, which the New Age has repackaged and regurgitated, by the way, a lot of people believe that they're communicating with ascended masters who are residing inside of Shambhala. People will astral project, they will remote view, they will get little glimpses of these things. So if Shambhala is the middle, the central city where the king resides, the Nazis wanted to have access to that place because in their mind, they're descended, so they have a birthright based on their race to the inner earth. Because if the Aryan race, according to theosophy, was the supreme supernatural race, they would have been the race lording over all the other races and all the others with power, which means that they would have the supreme, or what we would call the supremacy of the races of supernatural entities inside the earth. Very occultic. These ideas were really made popular by Madame Blavatsky, Helena Blavatsky. She had compiled a lot of her works into the Secret Doctrine, and that was really kind of a blueprint for a lot of the modern theosophical movement and the New Age movement as well. The Nazis believed they had a birthright to this, and the Nazis also believed that if they could just find the right entrance and get the right information, they could find the king of the earth. And they were set on finding the king of the earth. The Honor Knob Society, they went around looking for relics. Heinrich Himmler headed it up. They went all over the world collecting relics, ancient relics that were written about in ancient manuscripts, just crazy things that were used in rituals to summon the old gods. Now, I think it's a good time to say, before we go to where the Nazis went, let's go back to how the Nazis came about, because this is also very pertinent. After World War I ended, Germany was in shambles. I mean, you're talking about devastation. You can find footage of this, film footage of the remains, what had happened after World War I. And so 1910, there was a society developed called the Thule Society, and it was a secret occult society. And the Thule Society, there's also connection to the name Thule also as also being a city, an antediluvian city, depending on who you talk to. But the Thule Society, it came about, it was birthed in 1910. And then you get up to 1919, where they entered into the political scene by the creation of the German Workers' Party. So this was how they brought occultism into the politics. It wasn't always like that. It was strategic. And so this Thule Society, they enter onto the political scene and they start basically offering ways of rebuilding Germany from the shambles of World War I. The people were fertile. They needed some hope. They needed something that was going to bring them out of this. They needed a resurrection, if you will. And the German Workers' Party, through the Thule Society, did just that. And that's why when you look at a lot of the videos of the Third Reich, they would have these processional marches. And you would see these statues and imagery of the gods of old. A lot of the basically resurrected ancient Roman paganism, Babylonian paganism, Babylonian, what we would call Babylonian mystery schools, getting into polytheism, the gods. And so they entered onto the scene in 1919 with the political system, with the German Workers' Party, and everything started to shift. That was really that was a time when Adolf Hitler was being groomed specifically for this role as an occult leader. Most people don't know this. He did not just get groomed in that time period. He actually, going back to his youth in Vienna, was being trained up in theosophical literature, things that were absolutely prepping him. You hear stories of like wealthy children going to preparatory school. They're being groomed for political roles. Well, Hitler was being groomed for an occult role from his childhood. So by the time 1919 rolls around, the invention of the German Workers' Party, Hitler is essentially just walking out the things that he was being groomed for as a child. But now he's being trained in Vril magic. That's V-R-I-L, the Vril. Now, this takes us back to 1871 with this book that comes out by Edward Bulwer Lytton called The Coming Race. Vril. Literally, Vril was in the title, Vril, The Coming Race. And it talks about this man who basically sinks down into this catacomb And he falls and stumbles down into this realm where he meets a supernatural group of entities called the Vril. They're sort of human, but they're supernatural. They've got latent abilities. They can communicate telepathically. They've got crystals where they can project energy and telepathic thoughts through their crystals. But it's important to note that this book was never sold as being true. It was always considered fiction in its day. Never claimed to be nonfiction, by the way. However, the late 19th century occultists, again, Madame Blavatsky and Rudolf Steiner, they took this information and they said that it was actually written as a coded, non-fictional truth. Basically, it was a biography, but it was written in the form of fiction. Like, it was sold as fiction to the mainstream people. Basically, it was a way of hidden in plain sight. That's what they believed. They fully believed this. Now, Blavatsky is the one, again, who founded the Theosophical. All her works were the basis of the Theosophical Society. And what was fascinating was that they taught that this particular book was a manuscript for those who were initiated. And the Nazis believed that they were descendants of this group of supernatural people living inside the earth called the Vril. Now, the Vril was a power force, or a power source, if you will, of creation and destruction, according to their belief. They believed that if a child could learn how to harness the power of Vril, that child could destroy armies that were coming against their people. So the Vril were a supernatural race of entities that were kind of human-esque, if you will, maybe what we would call Nephilim, living under the earth, post-flood, by the way, who were descended from the Aryan race before the flood, who came back after the flood. Again, the second incursion idea. And they were descendants there, and they had these psychic abilities, supernatural powers. Now, the Nazis believed that they had the same abilities, but that they were not accessible because their genealogy had been watered down. So that's why the Nazis wanted to perfect their race. A lot of people only have part of the story. They say, oh, the Nazis believed in, the white race. No. They were trying to perfect a supernatural race of Nephilim bloodline that was, according to Edward Bulwer-Lytton and the Theosophists, that they were living underneath the earth even to this very day, but they had no reason to come to the surface. They had everything they needed down in the earth, which is kind of reminiscent of the idea of Shambhala also being in the earth, where they would have no need to leave this paradise land. They have everything they need down there for whatever the reason. They would only come to the surface if they had to. So the Nazis not only wanted to get down there, they were constantly looking for anything that they could find. High technology, entrances into the hollow earth, writings by the various cultures that might help them find the right entrance to get to the king of the earth. So the Nazis were just completely obsessed with this. So they ended up going over shortly before their New Schwabenland expedition, which was 1938. Shortly before that, they go over to Greenland and they locate this set of manuscripts called the Edda. These were ancient Nordic writings that were detailing a hollow earth and an entrance into the hollow earth. The Edda then led them over to the Tibetan monks, namely the Bon Post sect of the Tibetan monks. They were the ones that were guarding the opening to the Himalayan mountains. Essentially, there was allegedly there was an opening to the hollow earth in the Himalayan mountains being guarded by these monks. And it was rumored that the monks had contact with a superior race of beings that lived inside the earth. They were called the White Brotherhood. It had nothing to do with the Nazis and the white race, I had to say. But the monks claimed to have had regular contact with what the general term was the inner chiefs. They got in with the inner chiefs. They were also called the White Brotherhood when you get into theosophy and some of the occultic writings. I think if you want to look at things through the most biblical of lenses, the White Brotherhood could be one of two things. They could be fallen angels. Now, I don't know if we've talked about this in a previous interview, but if you do the math based on some of the language in the Bible, there's easily 30 to 50 million fallen angels. There's a passage in scripture that talks about the hosts of heaven, the number. And when you look at the idea of 1/3 of the angels falling, that's where, and I know that there's some symbolic language there, but most scholars agree that 1/3 of the angels fell with Satan. If you take 1/3 of that number, you end up with somewhere, and again, I know you say, wow, 30 to 50 million, that's a pretty big window. But when you're dealing with ancient numbers, a certain number or a certain descriptive number could be on the low end this, on the high end this. So if there was somewhere between 30 and 50 million fallen angels, only some of them are bound in Tartarus. So there's a lot of fallen angels, but there's even more holy angels, which is awesome. The angelic hosts of heaven, the armies of angels in heaven, far exceed the angelic armies of Satan. Because the ones that fell, and by the way, there's also scripture talking about elect angels. So not only does God elect humans, he also has elect angels. Kind of a cool little side note. So I do believe, looking through the biblical lens, that what would make the most sense would be that it's a fallen angel taking on a certain shape or form. Again, the whole shape-shifting ability. Or it could be a demonic manifestation, because demons are very well known to manifest as apparitions. You hear stories of an apparition appearing to someone, and they appear and then they disappear. So likely fallen angels, but could be demons. So the Nazis go over there, and these Buddhist monks knew who the Nazis were, of course, and they welcomed them. We actually document this in the film. We have a lot of really high resolution images showing the Nazis with the Buddhist monks. They welcomed them, even though they had different political ideologies. They believed that the Nazis were a fulfillment of a prophecy given in their Buddhism, where the Nazis were going to fulfill what's called the fifth Dharma cycle. And so they welcomed the Nazis. They said, yes, in fact, we do have contact with the inner chiefs, the White Brotherhood, which were divine entities according to them. They allowed the Nazis into these regions of the mountains, into the Hollow Earth, and they allowed them to meet with the White Brotherhood according to the stories that later came out through the Nazis' own testimonies. They also allowed them to use some of their technology to do electromagnetic testing into the earth where there were openings. Now, here's where it gets interesting. The Nazis then, after befriending all these Buddhist monks, they took about 200 of them back to Nazi Germany, basically deputized them as SS soldiers so that they could be official, and they created a think tank with the Buddhist monks in Nazi Germany, deciding where they were going to go to find this opening into the earth in Antarctica. So they apparently got some information from these inner chiefs, this White Brotherhood. And remember, Antarctica is not in the Himalayas. This is a whole nother location. Come back to Nazi Germany with their 200 monks that they basically set up as soldiers, create this think tank, and they began researching. Shortly after, in the Der Spiegel, which was a German publication at the time, they announced to the people, we have found the opening to the Hollow Earth that we've been looking for. So then they head out to Antarctica on what's called the New Schwabenland Expedition. Before this, people did not go out there. The technology wasn't there. People were probably scared to go out there. They didn't want to die. The Nazis had basically gone out to Antarctica with the idea of declaring this land for themselves. This was the land that they wanted. They knew exactly where to go after all their research and after all the traveling around, the work they did with the monks, the Edda, they combined all of that. They go down and they basically deem this spot of Antarctica as New Schwabenland. Now, that was based on the name of the ship that they took to get there, which was the New Swabia. Kind of an interesting little connection. Many people believe that World War II would have never happened if the Nazis would not have gone and set up shop in Antarctica. So what exactly did they find in Antarctica that really posed a threat to all the other governments of the world to where everyone wanted to come against them with World War II? Remember, Hitler was on Time magazine at one point. Hitler was not considered a maniac by the governments of the world until he was considered a maniac. Antarctica is a mystery in itself. We still don't fully understand Antarctica. But in 1537, a map shows up called the Perry Reese map and there's no ice on Antarctica. So in the 1500s, if this was a accurate representation, Antarctica was not underneath ice. And that's not very long ago when you consider the history of the world. 1537, Perry Reese map, pretty fascinating little. What brought the ice? I don't know. Was the ice there to keep people out? Was the ice somehow created by whatever forces are residing there? I don't know. But what we know is that there's ice there now, and it's such a harsh climate. It's like the harshest climate in the world. You're talking about some of the craziest winter temperatures and also being a dry environment. The Nazis went there fully prepared. And according to General Dönitz, during the war, he gave an interview saying specifically that in case things took a turn for the worse, they already had a backup plan because they had already established a fortress within the ice. Now, that was a direct reference to what is called Base 211. So, the Nazis go down there. It's very likely that they went ahead and established Base 211 in that initial expedition in 1938, which, again, if the Nazis had not been successful in going down there and setting up shop, it's likely that World War II never would have happened. It's funny how the mainstream modern world tries to tell all these reasons for World War II while totally ignoring all the things that surrounded it before it actually happened. It's kind of like with the Civil War. What we're talking about the Civil War is really not actually what happened. The causes and what led to the Civil War were not exactly what they make it out to be. I'm not going to go on a tangent there. But people love to take their agenda and to paint history with the paintbrush of their agenda. So, the Nazis come back, and you now have World War II stemming up. This is wild. Everybody's coming against the Nazis. I'm not saying they were good people. They were not. They were occultists. They were very much racist in the term that they wanted to perfect their race. They wanted to bring out their latent abilities. If in fact they were descendants of these Aryan Nephilim, that's what they wanted to do. And again, this is their belief. This is what they believed was their birthright. And something led them to Antarctica. And by the way, they come back from Antarctica and say that they had contact with the king of the earth. You do the math, figure out what that means. The king of the earth, prince of the power of the air, the god of this world, the king over Shambhala. It's not really that much of a stretch. They obviously came into contact with Satan if they came in contact with the king of the world. In their terms. They come back, World War II starts. Interestingly enough, before the war started, they started sending submarines of some of their highest ranking Nazis. You're talking about doctors, engineers, the most brilliant minds, the magicians, occultists. Before, during, and even after World War II, they began a massive exodus of what totaled to be over 1 million Nazis that just fully disappeared. And they didn't know they disappeared until after the war, when, they were doing checks and balances on everything in Germany. The entire Reichstag Bank disappeared. By design. I mean, this is all by design. The Nazis knew what they were doing. They were taking these submarines before, during, and after the war in this massive exodus. By the way, during the war, a lot of strange things were happening in Nazi Germany. You had this society called the Vril Society that were really showing their colors. The Vril Society was the inner workings or the upper echelon of the aforementioned Thule Society. So the Thule Society was basically that was the group. That was the general assembly of this secret society. But the Vril Society was like the upper echelon of the Thule Society. And the Vril Society were the ones who were actually doing the seances, who were trying to tap into the Vril power that we've already discussed. The Vril was that power of creation and destruction, that power that would also awaken their abilities, going back to the Vril Yah superior race, who they believed were their ancestors currently living inside the earth. I do want to talk about the Vril Society once we get there. We've got a little more to cover here about the war. World War II takes place. The Nazis basically get their butts handed to them. That's what we're told. Hitler's dead, along with all these other major German Nazi leaders are declared dead. That's not what happened. Although the newspapers were saying that. We have the now declassified FBI documents, which we took from the FBI website. We got them directly from the FBI. We show them inside of the film. We do high resolution zooms. You can see the images. Hitler was spotted in Argentina after World War II, alive and well near the foothills of the Andes, which is interesting because that's also allegedly where one of the entrances to the Chinkana was. You also, around that same time, had all of these European twins, identical twins, blonde-haired, blue-eyed, identical twins being born to South American women that were not blonde-haired and blue-eyed. And then we find out that not only Hitler made it to Argentina, according to the FBI documents, but there was another very famous Nazi doctor who made it down there as well, who continued to practice his eugenics, by the way. He paraded around as a veterinarian to basically keep his cover from getting blown. But he did all sorts of these experiments on the women down there, and he was going around delivering their children. There's a whole lot of information out there about that. I don't want to go into too much of a tangent. Fascinating stuff. We don't cover all of that in the film. That's just a little bit of a side note from our research. Many people probably know his name. It's Joseph Mengele. He was considered a mad scientist from Nazi Germany. Mengele was going around doing all these things in South America, freely operating, and he was going house to house delivering the children of the people who he was genetically manipulating somehow. And that's why we have a whole lot of these European families now living there that were born from South American lineages, but they appeared to be German. It's completely wild. And what really made it even crazier was that you could say it's a conspiracy theory, but then Time magazine actually covered it. Yeah, really wild stuff about Joseph Mengele and everything that he did down there. He was also one of the doctors who was known for trying to take twins and transplant. He would take the eyeballs out of twins and switch them. He was trying to figure out if twins could be interchanged with their organs and their body parts. Very, very demonic stuff. So anyway, the FBI recognized that Hitler was alive and well. He obviously had made it down to Argentina, the foothills of the Andes. From there, we believe that he went to Antarctica. And you say, well, why didn't he just go in the submarines? Because everybody else was going in subs. Hitler was a very, very sensitive target. Everyone was looking for him. The powers that lied to the world and told us that he was dead, they were on a mission to locate him. So because of him being such a high value target, he would not have gone with the mainstream masses that were accessing down in the submarines. And by the way, these submarines normally would have had a payload of about 8 to 12 people. The Nazis were cramming upwards of 50 people in these submarines to send. They were trying to get as many of them down to base 211 as they could as quickly as possible before, during, and after the war. Over 1 million of them made it to base 211. Then the leftovers were brought to America, forgiven of their war crimes, totally forgiven of their war crimes, such as Wernher von Braun. He comes down and he ends up being like the father of NASA. Basically, NASA is created. The pharmaceutical industry is just booming now because the pharmaceutical industry came from Nazi Germany. Amphetamine pills, Adderall. That was essentially crystal meth in a pill that the Nazis created. The Nazis were able to stay up for weeks at a time on their amphetamine pills. All these pharmaceuticals that people take today and think that they're safe and effective, well, they're effective. Not sure if they're safe. That was a product of Nazi Germany. The dexedrine, different types of methamphetamines, that all came from Nazi Germany. That's how the Nazis were able to stay up for weeks plotting and fighting and doing all these things, all their missions around the world. They were high on amphetamines. Now, when we get into the Vril Society and the seances that they were doing, we're going to learn that a lot of the technology and the information that the Nazis had, they were getting it directly from otherworldly entities in their seances. Absolutely, they were getting technology, pharmakeia, chemical compounds and formulations. They were not just sitting around making this stuff up. It's kind of reminiscent of Nikola Tesla and others who were bringing high technology to the world. Well, where did they get that technology? Well, they were in cahoots with certain entities, seances. Sometimes they're referred to as ascended masters. But this goes back to what was taking place when we look back to the Native American stories of the reptilian coming through the portal and corrupting mankind and teaching mankind magic, cutting of roots, mixing of things to make potions, all kinds of, what eventually turned into synthesizing things. So I definitely believe that does come at its core origin point. It would be from seances. It's kind of like Black Sabbath said there was always the fifth member of the band in the room writing the music for them. Keith Richards from the Rolling Stones would talk about sitting in a chair, certain body parts getting hard and cold and being taken over and foaming at the mouth. Santana, you've got these crazy interviews that they gave where they would be taken over by an entity, and then the next thing you know, they've got hit music that the world loves. So yes, I do believe a lot of the technology, the pharmaceuticals, chemical compounds, absolutely came through channeling sessions. People were wanting to break on through to that other side. Jim Morrison, no pun intended, break on through to the other side. It was not uncommon for some of the movers and shakers, the famous, those that are loved by the world. They got a lot of their talents, a lot of their abilities, a lot of what they offered to the world and their inventions, technology. Yes, absolutely. Through channeling sessions, seances. The most plausible theory is that Hitler made his way to Argentina first. And by the way, the Catholic Church was very well known for smuggling Nazis into South America. The Catholic Church believed apparently in what they were doing. And again, we need to really make sure we don't get it twisted. When we study the Nazis, you can't separate the Nazis from the occult. The occult meaning tapping into higher entities, tapping into ascended masters, locating ancient technology, reviving all of these things, and also the interest in the inner earth and the races that might live inside the earth, dating back to being descendants of the Nephilim. Well, the Catholic Church also has set up churches on top of many of these, and I mean the Vatican, by the way, not necessarily the Catholic Church on the corner in your neighborhood, but the Vatican has been setting up churches, taking land, sacred land, entrances into these hollow earth catacomb cities, building churches, cathedrals on top of them. Interestingly enough, one in particularly right there near one of the Chinkana entrances. So the Catholic Church had a hand in smuggling the Nazis out of Nazi Germany. We're talking about the most elite of the Nazis, not the leftovers, but the main course Nazis, the upper echelon, the ones that knew and did, the movers and shakers. And you say, yeah, but we got movers and shakers brought to America through, Project Paperclip, Operation Paperclip. Yeah, we did, but they were the leftovers. Believe me, Von Braun and NASA and the pharmaceutical industry, that was all the fat trimmed off of the steak. The steak made it down to Antarctica, and it was planned accordingly. So the Nazis make it down there. It makes most sense that Hitler and some of the others that were the more sensitive targets made it down. And I do believe there's some very possibility that they went into the Chinkana and that's how they made it to Antarctica, to not be out in the main ocean, to not be out where they could be monitored. Possibly Base 211, because General Donuts again said that Base 211 was a fortress secured inside the ice. So we're not talking about a base built on the surface here. It's very likely that the Chinkana directly opened up into Base 211. It's just a theory. But that would make the most sense. Now, let's talk about World War 2.5. It's amazing how much the American government has completely deceived the taxpayer. I mean, they take your money and they lie to you about where it's going. People have really recent days really talked a lot about that. But let's just go back to post-World War II. We're told the Nazis have been completely defeated. Our government brings back a bunch of Nazis, forgives them of their war crimes, and then installs them as high-ranking government officials, gives them money and resources, and gives them new names even, to where they're slightly unrecognizable in some situations, depending on how bad the war crimes were. If their war crimes weren't as bad, they could keep their name. Anyway, there are a lot of interesting things there. The Nazis were down in Antarctica. The powerful Nazis, they had a fortress in the ice, and according to their own declarations, had been in contact with the king of the world. So, we have a very interesting scenario arise known as Operation High Jump. Now, the American government tells the people, they really build this up with a massive public relations. I mean, film footage, interviews, TV, just propaganda, that Admiral Byrd, Admiral Richard Evelyn Byrd, was going to be leading this massive exploration mission with somewhere over 4,000 people from the United States, Britain, and Australia, with a flotilla of 13 ships, whole bunch of airplanes, whole bunch of tools. They tell the people that it's an exploration mission. Here's the problem. There was not one exploratory ship. Every ship was a warship. Fighter planes, tools for war, not lab technicians, soldiers, military personnel. This was not an exploratory mission. They were going down to the ice to continue World War II. They were going down to the ice to try to finish what was started in Nazi Germany and defeat the last bastion of Nazis. But the problem was, they got down there and the Nazis now had perfected the technologies. And when they got down there, you have stories, personal accounts of UFOs, Nazi UFOs, not alien ships, Nazi UFOs coming up from out of the ice, out of the Arctic waters, and literally firing technology that we didn't know about. It was laser technology. Nowadays, we have laser technology where you can literally, with a laser flame, cut through steel. Maybe you can see videos on YouTube. I mean, there's people who that's what they do for a living. Back then, they didn't have that technology. The Nazis had technology with these flying saucers that were literally cutting ships in half. Our planes, Admiral Byrd was getting our planes shot down by Nazi technology that they did not have in Nazi Germany. That's why I call it World War 2.5. Operation High Jump was not an exploratory mission. It was a war. They went down there, they got their butts handed to them, and interestingly, some of the ships were completely removed from the registry after the fact, which tells us those ships were fully destroyed by technology that they could not bring back and explain to the people what had happened. Now, the USS Pine Island was one of those ships. Now, after the film got released, there were some naysayers that were accusing us by saying, well, you can go visit the Pine Island. You can go take a tour of the ship. You can find retired ships and take tours. Okay, that's the government easily either popping up some other ship and giving it a paint job and calling it the Pine Island, or just creating a whole new replica of it because it disappeared, and it is history. You can validate it was completely removed from the naval registry, as well as a couple of the other ships in the flotilla that later showed back up, but they weren't the same ships. It had to be damage control. But you know what? Damage control, that is the federal government's middle name. And sometimes it's worthy damage control. They do it to protect people. I get it. But at the end of the day, a lie is a lie is a lie. And who is the father of lies but Satan? Now, based on everything that happened down there, James Forrestal, Secretary of Defense, he comes out and really feels obligated to tell the American people what really happened. And it's interesting because he had a secret diary that he called his secret diary, where he documented all of these things that never got released to the public. It was held by the president, and it was held by other high-ranking government officials. He was on record wanting to tell the American people what really happened. He'd recorded it in his secret diary, and all of a sudden he's tossed out of his hospital room. I think it was like the third-story floor of a hospital in Bethesda, Maryland, and they suicided him. James Forrestal. Now, Admiral Byrd, who led the fleet, he comes back. He's completely distraught. He goes to Washington, does a full debriefing, and Admiral Byrd was the most highly decorated admiral in United States history. Matter of fact, since him, there's never been anyone with his credentials, with his decorations. He was an American hero. He still is an American hero. He comes back and he's told basically in Washington, you really just need to just cover this up, keep your mouth shut. He doesn't want to, but he does. He's good. He does what he's told. Again, he was kind of like the Wheaties box poster boy. I mean, Admiral Byrd was all over everything. Matter of fact, he had postage stamps with his face on it. He was one of, I think, 4 Americans who was awarded the ability to wear a medal with his own face on it. The guy is literally, he has gone down in history as the most decorated, most highly respected, not just admiral, but American hero, polar explorer. He was an expert in polar logistics, the first person to explore, according to the American government, to have certain exploratory missions of the North and South Pole. Of course, there's some debate there because the Nazis made it down to Antarctica before him. Anyway, very interesting thing surrounding Admiral Byrd. He's told, you need to be a good employee of the government. We're going to continue to make you the hero, but you got to keep your mouth shut here. Keeps his mouth shut. Now, fast forward. By the way, Operation High Jump took place between 46 and 47. 1952 rolls around. Admiral Byrd goes down to D.C., and he has been really working some of the politicians to submit a bill to Congress to start testing nuclear atomic weapons in Antarctica. You say, well, why would they want to do that? Because he knew there was something there that he felt needed to be nuked. Remember, they got their butts handed to them in Operation High Jump. That war that took place there, that battle that took place, they came back literally with their hats in their hands, tails curled. 52 rolls around. We really need to just start doing our nuclear testing in Antarctica. We need to start dropping these bombs in Antarctica. It's the safest, best place to do it, apparently, according to him. So a bill is getting ready to be introduced to Congress, right? 2 months before the bill gets introduced to Congress, you have the famous 1952 UFOs over DC. Now, most of us are too young to know anything about this. Matter of fact, my dad would have been far too young to even know about this. But the media covered this. We have full high-resolution scans in the film. We show this. We even have some of the film footage because it was filmed on actual film stock. It's not very sharp, but we cleaned it up for the film. You've got these groups of UFOs over the Capitol. Everyone knew about it back in 1952. You couldn't cover it up. They were literally declaring UFO flying saucers over the Capitol. And what's very interesting about it is that when they called the fighter planes to go shoot them down, by the time the fighter planes got up there, they disappeared. It was as if they just cloaked, or they were so fast that they were able to, in a split second, take off. Now, the planes landed, the UFOs came back. Planes went back up. This happened 3 times. The planes obviously did not have the technology or the speed to be tracking and tracing these UFOs. What's interesting, these were not aliens. These were Nazi UFOs, very likely the same types of UFOs that were responsible for destroying the ships and the planes at Operation High Jump. How do we know they're Nazi UFOs? This is amazing. If you look at the photos, and we compared in the film, they're in the traditional Luftwaffe formation. This was the formation that Nazi fighter planes flew in. It was like a little flock with a point man and back man. It's Luftwaffe. Typical Nazi flying patterns. While Admiral Byrd was in the midst of Operation High Jump, he apparently had contact with a Chilean newspaper via some sort of wire communication. And he said that based on some of the things that were going on, that he fears that some of the potential threats that they would be facing in the days to come would be flying craft that could make it from pole to pole in a matter of, minutes, essentially. I don't remember the exact quotation. We have it in the film, but essentially he told the Chile newspaper that the technology was going to be there for these vehicles, these flying saucers, to be able to go pole to pole really fast, which was unheard of at the time. So you have these UFOs showing up in DC 2 months before the bill gets submitted to Congress about nuking Antarctica, essentially. And as soon as the UFO flyover in DC took place, and we were clearly not able to stop them, at that point, immediately the bill gets just destroyed. Doesn't go to Congress. However, 10 years after High Jump, now Operation High Jump took place between 46 and 47. The UFOs over DC was 1952. 10 years after Operation High Jump, the U.S. government has officially had a year-round presence in Antarctica. Really don't know how to explain that. There are places in Antarctica that you can't go. Matter of fact, I'm told that if you go there, if you're able to go there, and you can, you're very limited on the areas that you're allowed to go to. There's places that are cordoned off. There's places that you'll never be able to go see or explore. Matter of fact, Steve Quayle talked about in our film that the Special Air Services, the British SAS had sent, or the British had sent the SAS out to Antarctica. I forget how many years after High Jump, and they basically all but one died in the process. And one of the guys came back, the only survivor. He came back and he said they encountered some type of an entity there. This is weird. But some type of an entity that appeared to be what we would call like a Yeti or an abominable snowman, but it was under some type of remote control. You can do the math and figure out what that means. Was it a biological, lab-created animal hybrid that was controlled? I don't know. There are things going on in Antarctica that we don't fully understand. It's a mysterious place. It's got a history of great mystery. And just a reminder, 1537 Perry Reese map showed it without ice. All we know, when we hear Antarctica, the first thing you think of is ice. You've got the North Pole and you've got the South Pole. So, very fascinating things. When this diary surfaced, claiming to be that of Admiral Byrd, it really has drawn a lot of interest worldwide. And whenever there's something of that great interest with such fantastic claims that defy logic, there's always going to be people who are going to bring criticism against it. And that's healthy criticism. I think as a researcher, we need to always be open to healthy criticism. Allow someone to challenge something that you say, because without challenging something, you really can't get down to understanding, first of all, why you believe what you believe. And also, is there a reality to what you believe? If it's truth, scrutiny should not put fear in your heart. If it's truth, challenging and scrutiny coming against it should not bother you, because you know it's true, or you're confident that it's true. As with Admiral Byrd's diary, his secret diary, you're dealing with a document that claims to be that of Admiral Byrd. And it documents, it's basically a flight log, which they always kept. Flight logs were totally normal. When somebody was going on an exploratory mission, they would keep a flight log of what happened in that mission. There was no difference with Admiral Byrd's diary. Matter of fact, it starts off with a flight log. And it goes into a very incredible, detailed explanation, which he says in the diary was being written after the flight log ended, where he says that he was writing the rest from memory because he had to get out of the plane. You can't keep doing a flight log. The flight log is done in the plane. He's got a radio man. There's just two of them in the plane. And then, according to his testimony, he was taken by what we would only be able to describe as some beautiful looking, pure race, Nordic, Aryan type creatures that he called beautiful men, that took him to have an audience with an entity called the Master. What's interesting is that he's on an exploratory mission of the North Pole. That's what it started out as. Admiral Byrd is basically, he loads the plane and he takes off. And within, approximately a few hours, he's not over ice anymore. He's now looking at a lush valley with waterfalls. And by his own word in the diary, he lowers down, he descends down to get a better look because he thinks he sees an elephant, and he gets down and he sees what he calls a woolly mammoth. Now, this is a place where should be completely iced out. This is a place that should be fully under the ice. It's the North Pole. But within so many hours of flying, he's now taken into another room. He's experiencing another place, and then he loses control of his plane. The controls completely just gyrate out. And then these two UFOs appear on the side of his plane, and they've got swastikas on them, by the way. And let's just say the swastika is not just a Nazi symbol. The swastika is one of the oldest symbols in history. And it's used, the Tibetans use it, Buddhists, Nazis used it, ancient cultures. It's a very popular symbol, and we show that in the film. But these UFOs pretty much create some sort of a force field around his plane, and they let him know, they speak through, they're communicating now through his radio, and they're letting him know that they're going to be taking him down into the North Pole, and he's going to have a meeting with the master, that the master requires his presence. So whoever this master was, he knew who Admiral Byrd was. He'd been keeping tabs on things going on the surface world. This would have been the king of the inner earth, king of the world. Admiral Byrd goes through a series of events to get there, and he records it all by memory. Now, what's fascinating about all this is that the master entity, again, he's not the master, but he calls himself the master. He appears to Admiral Byrd as a very ancient old man with years etched on his face. That's the terminology Byrd used, with years etched on his face. Satan is an angel of light, but he can also shapeshift. And we're told also in one of the epistles of Paul that Satan has ministers that can also transform into angels of light, appearing to be angels of light. And Satan can appear to be an angel of light. So we know that his appearance can change. I believe that Satan took on the appearance to look like an ancient sage, if you will. Maybe someone who's lived for thousands of years and who looks like he's lived for thousands of years. This is further selling his agenda to Admiral Byrd. Because if Admiral Byrd shows up down there and you've got some beautiful 33-year-old looking angelic being, it's not going to have the same weight as this ancient looking sage who could almost present himself as a creator of sorts. Someone who's been around from the creation all the way until now and aged with the creation, which is interesting because when we go to some other accounts of people who have allegedly gone inside the earth, when they come back out to the surface, time is different. Perception of time is different. Just like they say, if you were to take two twins, load one of them on a plane, he flies to the closest star and comes back to Earth. Based on the atomic clock, they're not the same age anymore. So there's something to say about time, time perception, time recording, up in the air, up at the closest star to Earth, and then also down inside the Earth. But Byrd comes back with this amazing story about having this meeting with the master, and his description of this city and gemstones and crystals, just this beautiful high technology city. It's just emitting, radiating with energy. Inside the Earth, by the way, taken in through the North Pole. It's fascinating. So what we did for the first time ever, this has actually never been done before. We brought in a voice actor. We hired a voice actor and we brought him in the studio. We did a dramatized version of Admiral Byrd's diary from the time when it goes from ice to the supernatural stuff. We, for the sake of everyone's attention span, we did not cover the 3.5 hours of flight log of ice, more ice, more ice, conditions and altitudes. But we go from the beginning of the flight log, we skip ahead to around 10 in the morning where he starts to see the atmosphere change. And then the weird stuff starts happening. It's dramatized with sound effects. Really, it's amazing. I got to tell you, this is one of those things that it's like old time radio. It allows you to experience what the diary would have been if you were actually there, hearing the story from Admiral Byrd himself. Anyway, for the first time ever, we're releasing it in 4K, and we're doing an exclusive release with End Times Productions. For anybody who's interested in checking out the Diary of Admiral Byrd as a standalone, if you're not able to go and watch the full film, definitely check out the link that's been hyperlinked into this video. End Times Productions is going to have it exclusively available, absolutely free for the first time ever in 4K. Go check it out. Now, summing up on the Nazis, I think it's a good time to talk about the Vril Society. Earlier, we had mentioned the Thule Society that was birthed in 1910 in Nazi Germany, and that was essentially the group that birthed the German Workers' Party. That was the whole vehicle, if you will, that brought occultism into the political realm that birthed the Third Reich. So, the upper echelon, consider, if you will, the Freemasons. Most Freemasons, they're lower level initiates. They'll even call them porch masons. A porch mason is generally at the very bottom of the pyramid. They've just got some basic knowledge. They've agreed that all paths lead to God. There's all these different paths, but they never really work their way up to learn all the different rituals. They're not able to become a 33rd degree unless they're initiated. They have to earn their way to the 32nd. Once you're at 32nd, you'll only be inducted or initiated. It's an honorary degree where they choose you. Well, the Thule Society, while it's not set up with degrees, the Thule Society had an upper echelon, which would have been kind of like the 33rd degree Freemason. You had to be initiated. They picked by hand special people who had psychic abilities, who had a track record of connecting with certain entities. So the Vril Society, that's where you find the leaders of the Nazi Party, the head honchos, but you also find a group called the Vril Maidens. This is essentially a group of women, witches, if you will. They were Nazi witches. They grew their hair really long, and they were extremely attractive, very beautiful women. And they had a track record of being able to communicate through seances. That was their specialty. Matter of fact, they were the ones that would initiate the seances for the Vril Society. The head of this group was a kind of a famous name at this point, Maria Orsic. Now, Maria Orsic or Orsich, depending on who you ask, she was very skilled in these seances, and what she would do was enter into this state where her eyes would roll back in her head, and this is all documented, by the way. This is not, as Steve Quell says, this is not out there information. This is real. This is not crazy in the realm of the Nazis. This is very much documented history. The eyes would roll back in her head. She would start this foaming or excreting of ectoplasm. This is getting into some very weird stuff that's a little outside of my comfort zone personally. As a kid, I only heard of ectoplasm with like the Ghostbusters, but in reality, that's not even what the ectoplasm was recorded as. It was a kind of a foamy, vapory kind of mass that would come out of the nose, the mouth, different orifices. And allegedly, this ectoplasm would burst out of these Vril maidens while they were taken over by an entity. So as the story goes, they grew their hair really long, sometimes down to their ankles, because they believed that their hair was some type of a cosmic antenna, some sort of an antenna that allowed them to communicate better than, say, a warlock or a man who was trying to do the same type of ritual. So they were more successful in their seances. That's why they brought them into the Vril Society, because they had these abilities of communicating with the entities, a lot of times because they were women and they had long hair. And they were also trained and very skilled in this type of magic. And so one instance, by the way, they were in this ritual trying to communicate with a recently deceased Nazi party member, because they believed in necromancy. Now, we know you can't communicate with the dead. You're just going to communicate with demons, posing as the dead. But Maria Orsic, she doesn't communicate with the person that she's trying to. She ends up getting taken over by these Nordic type entities. And she begins to speak, and ectoplasm is coming out of her face, and she starts to automatic write. This is really insane. She's writing an ancient cuneiform. I mean, this is ancient cuneiform. That's has nothing to do with any of her training or her upbringing. This was completely foreign to her. So she's writing this stuff out, these manuscripts in ancient cuneiform. And then in another seance, she's taken over by another entity, and she begins to automatic write again in what they deem to be some ancient, secret, coded Templars language. Almost like a non-language, if you will. So, two foreign languages to her. Esoteric in origin, by the way, both languages. And they don't know what to do with it. And so, the Nazis with their society that would go around, the honor nerve, they would go around and really get educated on the ancient cults, ancient technology, superior DNA, all of that stuff. And so they finally came around to figure out how to decode these automatic writings. 2 different sessions, 2 different languages, the same woman. What they found out was that they were schematics that had to come together. 2 separate documents, 2 languages were actually one single set of schematics. And it was a blueprint to create a flying saucer. Remember, this is in the 20s. They didn't actually figure out how to put all of this technology together until some 20 years later. And then they ended up creating what's called the Die Glocke, the German bell craft. Some people believed it was some sort of a time machine. I can't say that I would give any credence to that personally. That's not, I would not believe it was a time machine, but some of them told people, the rumor was that it was a time machine. I don't believe you can travel in time. I don't believe that at all. I want to say that for the record. But she was in another seance, and she said that the entities that had given them these writings were communicating from this star system called the Aldebaran, some type of a galaxy out in space. The best thing we could say is that it would be a different dimension. It was an interdimensional being communicating from another dimension, lying to her, filling her head with demonic lies. But the claim is that this schematic was to create a flying machine that would allow some of the Nazis to escape some of the coming dark days, and that they could somehow translate or transfer themselves from this realm into the Aldebaran realm by using this craft. Again, these things make no sense to the human mind, to the average natural mind, but to the occult world, there seems to be a lot of belief in this type of behavior and practice. So anyway, she ends up disappearing. There's no trace of her in Antarctica. There's no record of her death, and they could not find her after the war. So there's a lot of speculation of what might have actually happened to her. What makes the most sense is that the schematics for the flying machines was technology that the Nazis were using to build their different flying saucers. Regardless, it came from demonic entities, ascended masters, through seances. And this is how the Nazis got their technology, and it's on record that this technology came from these higher sources. Now, fast forward to America after the invention of the ministry that created rockets, NASA, all of these things involving Wernher von Braun. He said in an interview, and this is famous, most people have probably heard this, they were asking him about the technology. Where did y'all get this technology? Because all of the NASA technology was a continuation. The space, everything that we know here with NASA and the space program, that was a continuation of the Nazi space program, essentially. And von Braun, in one of the interviews, again, it's a famous interview, when asked about the technology, he kind of said, well, we got it from, and he looks up, them. So, and again, that's mainstream. He was very mainstream. He was a Disney hero. Disney did documentaries on von Braun. Von Braun's a household name in many circles because he was essentially the father of the space program and of NASA. Very intelligent guy. Von Braun actually said that he was given access to the allegedly crashed crafts in Roswell. Again, there's a lot of speculation about what actually happened in Roswell. We definitely know it wasn't a weather balloon. You'd have to be pretty stupid to believe that, which many of our grandparents probably did. But anyway, von Braun said he was given access to the crash site, and he described some of the skin on some of these little bodies as being like the rattlesnake skin that they came across in the sands where they were doing rocket testing. So von Braun has said quite a few controversial things on the record. I would have to argue that he was probably qualified to say some of the things that he said. So what he said would even further justify the teachings that were passed down from the Vril Society, that they received these forms of high technology from seances. And that's the Vril Society. Interestingly, the name Vril is going back to the power that was mentioned in Edward Boyer Lytton's book, where they talk about the power of the Vril. In 1908, a book came out that was a biography, by the way. It was not put out as a fictional story. It was presented as a biography by famous author Willis George Emerson, and it was called The Smoky God. And it documents, it's basically a biographical commentary on a sailor, Norwegian sailor by the name of Olaf Janssen. And according to the story, he is sailing in a ship, and he and his men, they end up going down into the North Pole in their ship via water. Somehow they get taken down in, and they meet a race of people there who have high technology. There's some accounts, some people believe that there was flying saucers down there, but the whole city was inhabited by 12-foot giants who were extremely friendly and generous towards Olaf. And I forget how many people were with him. I forget if it was him and his son. But the interesting thing was that Olaf and his crew that went down there meet these inhabitants that share a whole lot of things with him, and they allow him to stay down in this underworld city that is complete with what he calls a central smoky sun. So there's a central light source, like a sun in the sky, inside the earth, in the city that he happened to sail into in the North Pole. Now, interestingly, they document the whole stay is 2 years, but when he gets back up to the surface, apparently the time had gone differently, and he was actually gone longer than 2 years, but he thought he was down there for 2 years. His track of timekeeping down there was 2 years, but it was actually greater than that on the surface. And again, this was not a story that came out as fiction. From the time this book was published, it was always published and believed as a true story, as a biographical commentary on Olaf Janssen. I tend to lean towards the idea of some sort of a portal that would open up, that would allow somebody to enter in, to go from this place to another, where they can experience something different than what, say, the common man on a hike might find. That's definitely one idea. The other idea and it's interesting because when we consider people who have claimed to have historical accounts of people given instructions by their ascended masters or what have you, making their way down into some sort of a supernatural realm, like Shambhala. The idea is kind of interesting because Jesus actually was taken up to a high mountain by Satan himself, and Satan tempted Jesus by somehow showing him, and in this passage, this shows up in 2 of the Gospels, by the way, Jesus is somehow shown this projection of the kingdom of the world, the kingdoms of the world, and the glory thereof. But in a moment of time. Only one of the accounts uses that terminology, in a moment of time, and I believe it's in Luke. But Jesus is somehow able to see this tempting bait that Satan was baiting him with. He was able to tempt him by showing him the kingdoms of the world and the glory thereof in a moment of time. And what did Satan say? Bow down and worship me, and I'll give you all of this. So there was some type of a supernatural projection that took place. Was a window opened? Some sort of a portal or a doorway, supernaturally ripped open in the time-space continuum? I don't know. But when you consider accounts like Admiral Byrd, maybe even accounts like Olaf Janssen, and some of the other accounts that have surfaced over the years, the closest biblical precedent or the closest biblical scenario that would seem to shine light on that being a reality would be Satan having the power to give some sort of a display allowing somebody to experience something in a different realm before putting them back out where they came from. Not too far separated from the idea of somebody being abducted into an alien ship. Were they really in an alien ship? Probably not. Many times you hear about people being abducted, but their body was still there, almost like their spirit was taken somewhere and they experienced a projection or some type of an experience in another realm, but their body was still in the place, but it was out cold. The body was almost as if they were astral projecting against their wishes. But Satan has the power to show Jesus the kingdoms. He had the power to show Jesus the kingdoms of the world and the glory of it, all in a moment of time. You couldn't take a tour of one kingdom of the world in the moment, and one moment in time. Just one tour of a kingdom or a palace, that's going to take some time. So you can't walk through a single shopping mall and see every store in the mall in a moment of time. Yet Satan showed Jesus the kingdoms of the world, probably the most glorious kingdoms. Maybe even a glimpse of Shambhala. I don't know. We don't know what all those kingdoms were, but we know that Satan is the ruler of this world. And he's got the power to give things and endow gifts upon men in his deceptive role as Satan, the great deceiver. And he uses these things to tempt people, to deceive them and seduce their souls. He did this to Jesus. Jesus didn't give in. Jesus rebuked him and went on about his business. Admiral Byrd witnessed something very fantastic. If in fact the diary is accurate and is in fact real, I believe he saw Satan, and Satan has the power to show things, to project things, and possibly even to allow someone to enter into another experience in another realm, depending on the person. It would have to be, in the case of Admiral Byrd or somebody who is not Jesus, of course, if somebody is able to go into Shambhala or experience these types of deceptions, I have to believe that they are unregenerate people who worship false gods, people who are completely separated from the God of Scripture. Because if they were separate, if they were in fact in covenant with the God of Scripture, they would not be taken down into these realms and visiting with these gods. They wouldn't be taken down and experiencing these fascinating things if they were actually children of God, if they were God's elect. That's one of the common denominators. All the people generally that go and do these things and experience these things, they're void of faith in Christ Jesus. Totally void. They make friends with these entities. They come back with fantastic stories, sometimes unverifiable. So that's kind of the common denominator, is that Satan promises things to mankind, and he shows them to mankind, and he tempts mankind, knowing that his time is short. And what's fascinating about all of these things with the hollow earth, summing up how this all really brings us back to square one. All these different religions of the world that believe in a hollow earth, it's always connected to their gods, higher entities, spirits, spirit guides, ascended masters, and some of them have the audacity to blaspheme the name of Jesus and even say that Jesus was an ascended master. And let me tell you, they're gonna all learn the hard way at the end of the world, when every knee will bow, every tongue will confess that Jesus Christ is Lord to the glory of God the Father. And let me tell you, when everyone has to confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, that's before they are judged and thrown in hell. That's not like, oh, well, they're professing Christ, they're going to go to heaven. No. At that point, it's forced. At that point, they are slain, and they are proclaiming the glory of Christ at the end of everything before their judgment. So all these people, all these religions, they generally have another common denominator of a king, a belief of some sort of a king figure who's going to come up to the service of the world in the end days. It's funny, every religion practically has some prophecies of an end times worldview. But the difference is that Christianity is the only one that says that this king is the Antichrist. Okay, they all have their own views, but Christianity says, yeah. There is going to come a ruler. He is going to come upon the face of the world, the face of the earth, but he is going to be satanic. All the other religions say he's going to be good. He's going to bring peace. He's going to restore order. And there's some things also in Admiral Byrd's diary that kind of get into this as well, things the master tells Admiral Byrd. But there are prophecies in some of these ancient manuscripts and texts in these mystic religions, these hollow earth religions, that are prophesying that there's coming a day where this ruler is going to come to the world and he is going to literally reinstate peace, and he's going to bring order. He's going to bring some of the lost technologies, essentially reinstating a golden age. And it's fascinating because the world and the religions of the world are looking forward to this coming ruler, when in reality, the real Messiah already came. We're really excited to announce the brand new 2025 release of Hollow Earth Chronicles Episode 1 in ultra high definition 4K for the first time ever. It's available in streaming. You can head on over to fourthwatchfilms.com. That's FOURTHWATCHFILMS.com. I'm sure there's going to be a link hyperlinked in the description of the video. You can also check out the trailer for Hollow Earth Chronicles in 4K on End Times Productions YouTube channel, and definitely check it out. We've got DVDs available. We've got streaming options available, and we're really excited to get this information back out. It's a great content that we've produced that allows you to not just study history, but study history from a biblical perspective, and not just regular history, but supernatural history that is far more interesting than anything you're ever going to learn in the textbooks.